All right, John, let's do the intro. I don't know why I said that. Our intro
I don't
so
know
short.
either. Do you want me to? I do have something that I want to mention. Have any of you listened to this podcast at all? And please just say no.
No.
Thank you.
For like 20 seconds.
Yeah. Somebody
Hey.
got a few seconds just to verify that we're actually a podcast.
What's a podcast?
I heard Eric Vale say he did no research.
Excellent.
Then you're right. Like, you're exactly where you're supposed to be.
That's all we could ask for. That being said, we are a little more like the adult toy shop we thought you were talking about, and not the adult shop you were actually talking about. So we swear a lot. We're irreverent, but not to the point where we're obviously offensive for the sake of being offensive, anything like that. How okay are you with R-rated language? Let's call it that.
I'm fine with it.
We've all been to that adult
Cool.
toy store.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Perfect.
Julius heard that part of the conversation.
He did miss it. But yeah, we listened to a couple interviews with you guys, and it seemed very professional, above board. And for the most part, we stick to that, but we're a bit more casual for sure. So
Yeah. Nobody said shit one time, and I was worried.
But bring it on.
All right, cool. Welcome to Arcade's Dragon Ball Z. I'm Spencer.
Oh, is this the part where I say I'm John?
It is.
I'm John.
And today we've got a very special episode. We're excited to be interviewing the composers of Dragon Ball Z, of the American soundtrack, and we'll let them introduce themselves before we get started with questions. Go ahead, guys. Welcome.
All right.
you.
I'm Mike Smith,
Say something more than that.
coming to you from Allen, Texas.
There you go.
Hey, all right.
I'm Scott Morgan. I'm in Seattle currently.
Julius Dobos here, San Francisco Bay Area.
Wow. Were you guys, and well, I guess we'll just get right into it. Were you guys like this far apart when you were actually doing the show?
Oh,
Or
no.
No.
Was it all on location?
We were all here in where I am now, sort of north of Dallas. I guess it was actually North Dallas.
Yeah. Plano, right?
Okay.
If you know that area.
Well, I remember this was only a few years after 28K modem internet time, so
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
really hard to
So
do
it would have been
coast to
impossible
coast.
to. Yeah, exactly.
You know, back then we did do sessions occasionally, not related to Dragon Ball Z, that we had to use a device called a Zephyr in order to connect with a remote studio. And that was very cutting edge. And it was certainly not part of what we were doing for Dragon Ball
Yeah,
Z.
so at the time I was in Denton, Texas. Or no, I was in Louisville I think I moved somewhere in there.
So
but-
Scott went to school as a comp major, a music composition major at University of North Texas, which has a remarkable music department that is located in Denton. I just thought I'd add that for you, Scott.
Thank you. Yeah, I started as comp and then I switched to music theory, and that's what I graduated with. And then I stayed on for like some jazz and conducting afterwards. But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
John, what did you get your degree in? Was it an official like music theory or?
Yeah, my degree was in dropping out halfway through. So, and I graduated top of my class. Let me tell you
Cool.
about that.
Cool. All right. I just thought that I'd bring that up.
But you're a music student?
I was, yeah, for audio engineering. I read all the music for this podcast, but
Nice.
most of it is actually all of it is inspired by your works.
Oh
So-
wow.
But we'll get
That's
that.
awesome.
We'll get
All
that later. We'll move down the line.
So that brings up closer then, because even though I did go to a ton of different schools and learned a ton of different things, I was also a dropout in terms of not completing a full program.
Hey,
So
Wow.
Right on.
solidarity.
That's awesome.
I dropped out of the jazz department.
That's a very jazz thing to do, though, isn't it?
that was
So jazz. So
they,
jazz.
they were so brutal. That was whoa.
It almost seems against jazz to have a jazz department.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they said to show up at 8 a.m., was it just understood that you'd show up at like 8:30 or 9?
Yeah.
No.
That'd work.
No, absolutely not. It was the top jazz band rehearsed at 1:00, and then the rest of them would filter down through the hours. I think the last one was 9:00 at night.
They're called. Let me just help out here again with UNT. They're called the 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock jazz bands.
Yeah.
Oh.
And so it's a big deal to be from the 1 o'clock jazz band.
Yeah, because that was the top band, and it was very difficult to get into, and especially if you're a rhythm player like me. they had like Grammy nominations or awards or something.
Holy crap.
Wow.
Yeah.
So actually
Totally legit. Yeah. At the school I went to, we had a jazz band, which I was a part of for one semester, that didn't even get anywhere close to jazz. It was the band director for their marching band, in his bike shorts. And it was the antithesis of jazz. This is while I was in school. I'm in this jazz band thing that was terrible. And one of my friends one night called me up and he said, "Hey, Mike, where are you?" I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because the concert's going on." And I had totally blown it off, missed it, spaced on. I did not get a good grade in that class.
Oh, no.
I did the same thing. I'm not in music at all, but I did the same thing with clarinet in high school. Almost failed the class just because
What? I didn't know you played clarinet in high school.
I played clarinet in junior high as well.
Oh, wow.
It's a great instrument.
It's pretty good. They didn't allow it in the jazz band, and I railed against that because I feel like it has a place. It's not
It does.
exactly the most common, but it's got a place.
It's usually played by one of the sax players who knows clarinet as well, and then they grab it when they need it.
Well, and I wanted to be a sax player, but they talked me out of it because every kid wanted to play sax or trumpet or whatever. But anyway, so I want to get started with questions that you guys have probably answered 50 times over, just to kind of lay the groundwork for our listeners. And I guess just to satiate my curiosity, how did you guys come to work together? Did you realize that you were going to be working on Dragon Ball Z, anime, or were you just looking for work? How did this all start?
I guess it's 3 different stories, so I think Mike should start.
Okay, so I was working for Bruce Faulconer back, I don't know, when was it, 99, 98, something like that. We were working out of his house. I was primarily working on mixing the audio for this show called Michael Holligan's Your New House that was on the Discovery Channel.
Okay.
Really good show, high quality home improvement show. But it was good training on mixing audio because of the situations that they would record things in were so bad, so difficult that it took a lot.
But not as bad as Cheaters.
Cheaters.
You worked on Cheaters?
I'll let you talk about Cheaters.
That show was pretty bad too. The Michael Holligan, because of all the hardware.
Yeah, they would talk and hit hammers at the same time, while they're telling you to do things, and that's just getting started. But so we're working on this show, and it was not a lot of fun. Every once in a while, something small would come in that would be like. I remember this job for doing a PBS special on the Albuquerque Balloon Festival. So I got to do a little composing on that, but Bruce really did most of the composing on that. And then he came to me one day and he said, "Hey, there's this RFP for those who don't know, that's a request for proposal."
Okay, thank you.
Yes. An RFP came in from Funimation. We hadn't heard of Funimation before. But he said, "Hey, this company is looking for somebody to compose the soundtrack for some cartoon." And I was pretty adamant. I was like, you need to bid on this, Bruce, because that sounds like a hell of a lot more fun than Michael Holligan's Your New House does. And I actually went and spent like the afternoon or the rest of the day composing a lot of the themes that went into the first few episodes of Dragon Ball Z, or the first few that we worked on. I think we started on 68, just to prove to Bruce, because the timeline was so tight on what they were asking for, that, I could compose the music fast enough for their schedule, right? So he bid on it, and somehow we got it, probably because we were the cheapest. And so that's how I started working on it. Why don't I let Scott take it from there?
Okay. In a nutshell, I was playing at getting a jazz degree from UNT, and I had finished my music theory degree, but I was looking out for jobs, and I had gotten to the point where I think I had acquired the skills that I wanted. Like, I had a certain sound that I wanted to be able to do, or a certain set of sounds that I wanted to be able to create. So I'd finally kind of arrived at what I was looking for. I still had a lot more that I want to learn, honestly. But anyway, so I just noticed a job ad on the composition board at school. It was funny because I had previously worked with another Falconer or whatever.
Really? It's kind of an uncommon name.
Yeah, who was not related at all to Bruce, but I didn't know. I just assumed it was the same guy.
Nice. Okay.
And so I didn't even call Bruce. I just called the dude that I knew, and I was like, "Hey, I saw your ad on the composition board." And he was like, "What are you talking about?" But this is the guy I was talking about. His name is Tom Faulconer, He wrote the Chili's baby back ribs theme and
Oh my God.
a Chevron oil jingle that was really famous.
Huh.
He used to work at a studio in Dallas called Goodnight, and the bass player from my college band, he was his assistant, so we could get free time for our band in the studio. Anyway, so Tom, I was like, no, that's not me, and so I contacted Bruce. I sent like a resume and demos, and then it took like me calling him back like a whole bunch of times before he finally listened to it, because I would call and he said, well, I haven't listened to the demos yet, sorry. And then I call again later, and he kept encouraging me to call back, so I did. And then finally, I think he got embarrassed because it had happened so many times. He says, wait a minute, I will listen to them right now and call you back. And so he would call me back. He's like, okay, I think the next thing is to have an in-person interview. At this point, they were transitioning from working in the house to the studio, because like Mike mentioned, they used to work out of his house, and so I went up there, and I for some reason we went to his house too, and I got to see his fancy sports car, and I got to see his house just infested with gear everywhere, and then I got to see the studio. And Bruce asked me during this interview, he's like, have you ever watched Dragon Ball Z? And I was like, oh, I think I've seen it in passing on TV, but I hadn't. And so he talked about the show a little bit and described some stuff to me, and he wanted me to write some spec demos. So I wrote some fight music. I wrote 3 fight tracks, and then I wrote a track that was supposed to go for Bulma. I didn't even know who she was. And then I went back and I think I went to Hollywood Video and got some VHS tapes, which had the like ocean dub on there. I think it was Tree of Might, Dead Zone, and then like the first Dragon Ball Z stuff, and maybe there were 4, because I swear I watched the original Dragon Ball a little bit too. But one of the tracks, I ended up copying this really rapid piano sound and drum track from Dead Zone, and I did a sound alike of that track, and that's the one that Bruce really loved when I played back everything. Yeah, so I joined the crew as mostly doing editing work, and then after 10 episodes or so, I guess I started writing a little bit on the show, and that's my story.
It's awesome, especially because like you came from like the only exposure for DBZ you had was from, it sounds like, the movies, which is, I don't know why, that just is very interesting.
Yeah, well, yeah, I watched some episodes too. Like I'd seen the very first few episodes of Dragon Ball Z, and then I saw the very first episode or 2 of Dragon Ball as well. But yeah, I wasn't totally caught up, so I was a little bit lost on some things.
I was completely lost when I started. Not a clue.
Because you guys, so the Falconer Studio got the proposal, you said like around episode 68?
That's where Mike and Bruce started, yeah.
Okay, so there was a whole different studio doing the music before then.
Yeah, the Canadian studio.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Okay, so just to untangle the post-noodle mess in my brain, the previous 67 episodes, did you guys recompose that when Funimation redubbed those episodes, or was it the same? Okay.
In fact, there's a group of fellas right now. Scott, you could probably name off everybody in that group that is.
I can't.
Well, I know that there's Marcelo, and anyway, we've seen a little bit of what they're doing, but they're going back and trying to redo the first 67 episodes by editing the music that we did and composing some of their own along that vein. Yeah, they're doing a very nice job of it from what we've seen.
Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, that's a really cool project and very flattering. But so Shuki Levy was the guy who's credited with the score before us. But there's a guy who wrote like most of the Power Rangers music, who was Ron Wasserman. I think it's his name. Yeah. So it's similar deal where he was like the real composer, I believe, for a lot of stuff. And he wrote the Rock the Dragon theme. And I think most of the music that was actually the quote Shuki Levy score. So that was the first bunch of episodes. And I believe Mike and Bruce started off trying to emulate them a little bit. So we were doing certain nods to their score, but we definitely had our own sound. And then when GT came around, they had a different guy for that. And then eventually they did go back and rescore the first episodes with a different guy, Nathan Johnson, I think is his name. So there's so many, you say the American score, but there's so many, so many different composers, so many different groups of composers that worked on this show. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And before we get too far down the road of like questioning, Julius, I'm curious when you came into the picture as well.
Yeah, I had a little bit different story. First of all, I didn't know anything about Dragon Ball Z. So before I was working on it, actually, even when I started working on it, all I knew was that in the kitchen, the three of us talked about. Otherwise, I had absolutely no clue what Dragon Ball Z was. But my relationship with Falconer Productions started, well, it's a long story, but the short version is the company was doing other projects as well, other things, well, mostly composition, but they were some other audio work and whatever else. And they were doing the audio post-production, which is mostly, dialogue editing and sound effects and mixing, but not necessarily music, for a short film. The short film had some okay budget behind it, and it was meant to be for film festivals, and it was done in Dallas. And if you know anything about Texas, one thing that people like to do there is really hold on to what their production is and try not to outsource it to anywhere outside of Texas. So the whole thing was a Texan production. By a total accident, and again, this is like very early internet times, I got into a online chat with the director. I was at that time back in Europe, where I'm from originally. And at that point, I had released albums, I had released a bunch of things, and I had written film scores, full feature-length feature film scores. So I just started talking to the director and thinking, okay, it's interesting, maybe another job on the horizon. Anyway, it turns out that she was working with a local audio production house doing the audio post-mix, and that was Falconer Productions. I sent in a demo, and she absolutely loved it. And so basically, I ended up scoring the film, which is called Black Strawberries. I was talking with the director, who mentioned that I, by the way, got the job, and someone else wanted to really get it too, who was local and Texan. And so I can only imagine how unhappy that person was, but I didn't really care.
Surely.
Because I was just happy to, write that score, which actually went on and won some awards at film festivals. The film did. I was really busy with my productions back in Europe. There were lots of different things that happened there that gave me the idea that, well, I want to kind of look around at the other side of the pond, as we say it, see what the industry is like there and, what I can do. And I was at that point writing music for films that were going to film festivals. And I was also looking for sort of a market to expand into. And so I called back the director, who connected me with Bruce. And I already had gotten the idea that he was looking for someone like many, many months before, but I wasn't interested. And then I called him back pretty much a year later. And I said, well, is the offer still on? Because I might be actually interested in see if maybe we can do something together. And he very fairly said, well, yes, but let's talk once you're here. I wrapped up many things back at home at that time, and I moved to the US, not really knowing too many people other than the director. Next day, I met with Bruce, and in the meantime, he had listened to some of my albums that were out and things like that I gave him, and he handed me a contract. And my understanding at that point was that he needed an extra composer because there were more jobs to do than the capacity of the company at that point. And that included scoring for many different projects outside of Dragon Ball Z. And that ended up being part of that package was Dragon Ball Z. But again, I didn't know about that project. So nothing really about DBZ attracted me or made me curious about him more than not. It was just a random connection. Then a few weeks later, I was working on like 3 projects parallel. And one of them was DBZ. And the other 2 were, one was a American Heart Association training video. We did a whole bunch of those. It actually had some pretty well filmed like simulation situations in like ER scenes and whatnot. So I put this really Hollywood kind of score, and then I still remember the director came in for a review. Of course, every time there was a review, we quote unquote had to hide and pretend that we didn't have much to do with the writing. Well, I wasn't really in picture, so to speak, at that point. So I was explaining to the director what I did, and Bruce was like, yeah, okay, it's like works really well, right? And the director was like pretty impressed because it was a bigger sounding score than probably he was used to. When that project ended, I got more busy with Dragon Ball Z as well. Before that, I was writing some pieces here and there when it needed, whatever that Bruce thought that I could jump on without knowing all the characters and the whole story. So slowly but surely, I got familiar with the story, and then I was working on it pretty much full time.
I got to admit, I'm a little disappointed because it sounds like none of you were like anime nerds.
You know who you need to talk to? You need to talk to Ben Kaspari.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Ben was our music editor, who was very good. He's a good friend to all of us today. We talked to him not that long ago. But I
gotta remember to push to include him on these things.
Yeah, he's great to have along. But so not only was he a great music editor, but he came to the job because he was a huge Dragon Ball Z fan, And he came in knowing all the music that he was going to be editing and everything like that. He has a great story about how he started working with us, that he just really beat down the door to get in there.
Yes.
And we were glad he did, because he was great.
Ben was a super fan. He had like all the VHS tapes, and he would, encode things. He would get the Real Player files that they had at the time, and because there weren't. No,
Oh my God! Yeah,
it was Real Player back in the day. He knew the whole story from start to finish. He was a super fan. He's a huge part of this story, actually.
Not only we didn't know about, or I actually really didn't know anything about the show, but I remember the first time it was mentioned was when I was signing a contract on my second day in Dallas, and DBZ was part of it, and it did come up, but it wouldn't have swayed me because I didn't know anything about the show until 2-3 weeks later when I went to Walmart or Target or wherever to pick up some things. And I still remember this, that I was like recognizing the characters on, mouse pads and pillowcases and kids things, and seeing the figures that I was working on during the day. So I connected the two things, and like, okay, I guess that's a significant part of the job here. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know anything about it either, except I think I had just seen it in passing, like I mentioned before. But I just did research before I did the spec compositions, and that's the only reason I knew anything really. But at the time, if you went on the website, I remember there was like just about 3 toys you could order, and they were always sold out, and there was not much. That was all that was available. There was nothing in toy stores or whatever. And then, like some way into the job, when our stuff finally started coming out, and then it was starting to pick up. I remember being blown away because there was a time when the Dragon Ball Z section in the toy store was bigger than the Star Wars section. that blew my mind.
Awesome. Yeah, that's way cool.
Yeah, so it went from that just 3 little sold out toys on the website to like being bigger than Star Wars in less than a year, I think.
That's amazing.
Did that ever, while you were working on it, seeing that, did that ever affect? And I guess this goes for everybody. Did that ever affect your ego at all? Being like, I'm working on this huge thing. I'm the best. Did you ever get to that point?
Totally.
Anybody?
Like I used to run around Target saying, "Hey guys, guess who I am? Guess what I do?" So
I think I'd be a liar if I said that it didn't. I mean, you try not to let it affect you, but
for me, honestly, it didn't. I guess part of it is I didn't realize at that time how big the show was. But the other part of it is the work was busy enough, as it usually is for film composition. Whether it's TV or film, it is usually very, very fast-paced and last minute everything, which I was used to at that time. But similarly, I didn't even have really time to, like, literally I didn't have time to watch the shows. I've never, even to this point in my life, I have seen a full show when I was not working on it. I never watched one show, even at that time. So,
wow.
Which is, I know it's weird that you're working on something and your music is next week is literally on Cartoon Network and the country is watching it. And it was #1 show at that time. So it was, I don't know how many million people seen it, but you would think that you want to be there or be part of it. But you're already working on the next episode while that's airing pretty much. So you're really focusing on that. Not to mention that watching things is the best when you're in a movie theater with others and you look at reactions, and just sitting in front of the TV and, hearing your music that you're awfully familiar with because you've went through the scene 250 times.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the point?
And you're thinking, damn, it's too low in the mix. What did they do?
Oh, it was brutal.
So you made me think though of the first time that when remember I was working on it pretty early on compared to these two jokers over here, and so I remember when I first started working on it, I was playing in a band and I went to band practice and I mentioned to my band mates, one of whom was a very young fella. I think he was like just out of high school, great bass player. And I mentioned, I'm starting to work on this show. It's called Dragon Ball Z. And he was like floored. He said, "Oh my gosh, my friends and I are big fans. We drop acid and watch that all the time."
It's a good way to watch it.
So
really
amazing.
Yeah. Then I was into it. I was like, okay, well, this is something.
Yeah,
As soon as,
this is something.
As soon as the acid's
as soon as
involved.
the recreational drugs enter the picture.
Right.
Yeah.
We're off to the races.
This is a very weird situation, Dragon Ball Z, because it's an anime that's already been aired in Japan with music, and then it comes over to the US. When you guys are doing the US scoring for it, did you watch the episodes or the scenes or whatever with the Japanese music? Did you have special cuts that were the Japanese voices without the music, or was it the US dubbed voices without any music or sound effects? Like, what was the situation
It was
when you guys would actually compose?
It was the US dubbed voices with sound effects.
Okay.
What we got were VHS tapes, right? And, you know, you understand a VHS tape has got a stereo audio track as part of the recording. And so, you know, I had the video, and one side of the audio, the left or the right side, probably the right side, was the voiceovers and the sound effects. And then the left side was the time striping, so that we could sync that with our equipment to do.
Or the other way around.
It could have been the other way around. Yeah. Don't hold me to that left right thing. But so we would get the voiceovers and the sound effects, but it was all the American version.
So it was like a blank canvas. Did you guys decide where to put the music, or was there like some kind of notes that came in that says like we need music in this specific scene, or how did that work?
I'm gonna let Scott take this one because he and I have a different memory of how this works.
Okay.
We
Cool.
conflicted each other on the previous interview.
We didn't agree. Like, we had an interview like 4 or 5 years ago, and Mike didn't remember the same way as Scott and I did. I was actually really curious now to see if Mike has remembered since. But
I recall that we got scripts and there were notes in there.
Maybe we should let Julius answer that one. Get the third point of view.
That's the gist of it. Like, we had the scripts, everything printed, and they were notes with red ink put in by the director. By the way, that's the only notes that I've ever seen. I've never seen notes from anyone else, including Bruce or anyone. The way I recall it was, what would you say, Scott, like a 20-page thing printed out, or 15,
It was the
20
script.
page?
What I remember was the script of the show with like stuff scrawled next to all the boxes,
Yeah,
lines,
like a
and stuff.
typical movie, yeah, script.
And it was way like, you think we moved around with the music too much? If we had followed what they said, it would have been 10 times worse.
But the part is that some of the notes were printed, and then they were actual extra markings with the red pen. I remember that distinctly, that they were almost like the printed ones were the basic ones, and then the red ones were additional, like on top of that.
Oh, I never saw that. So just for clarity, Julius and I didn't actually overlap much at the studio. So we could have had very different experiences. and then it would be because it was actually different. But when I was there, it was a script of the show, and then it was all handwritten. And at first, I think it was Barry's notes, Barry Watson, who was the director of the show at the time. And then it switched over, and I believe it was Evan Jones, the guy who did the mixing for the show at Funimation. And I believe he was the one writing the notes for a while. And then I don't know what I left the show after like the first week of the Heavens tournament stuff.
Okay. And this would come along with the VHS as well.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So what kind of notes would you guys get? Like, was it as simple as like, we want some kind of ethereal, like how specific would they get? Would they mention instruments, or would it just be like, music goes here?
I don't remember exactly how detailed the notes were. That the reason I don't remember exactly is because I don't know about you guys, but I mostly ignored them after taking a glance at them.
Well, my memory was that they didn't exist, so I guess I was kind of ignoring them myself. But there was a sort of overall note that music goes here, because they wanted music the entire time.
Well, that's what I imagine. Yeah.
It was mostly mood and sometimes stylistic direction, but I don't ever remember them saying like specific instruments or whatever. It didn't get that. I mean, it was very detailed in that they wanted this mood here, this mood there, this mood there. And when I talked to like Evan about it, he was like, "Oh, we never expected you to follow all that stuff. We're just trying to give you some idea of what we think should go there.
Wow.
And if it's impossible, then so be it. You guys were making the right call to like simple it out."
So ignoring it was the right call then, is what I'm hearing.
In some way, yeah. But
right.
I remember like one thing that was controversial was there's this scene where in the Garlic Jr. series where the Spice Boys or whatever, the Garlic Jr. henchmen were kicking the shit out of Gohan and Krillin. And this came directly from the notes. It said macabre circus music. And I was like, okay. And so I did it. And then, you know, a lot of people hated it, but I don't know. I think a lot of people also like it. So
yeah, it was great.
Super fun to write.
Yeah, I remember it distinctively because it's so different from everything else. And so just to hear that you got that note, like make this like creepy circus music, that's amazing. That's amazing. You just nailed it.
I can hear it right
honestly
now.
Tons of fun.
I think I remember John pointing that out specifically when we reviewed this.
Yeah,
episode,
the terrifying
so that's amazing.
Calliope stuff. Yeah, that was good.
I think the Calliope was Mike though. That was like part 2 that Mike did later for a different scene. It was a carnival, right? That there was a carnival scene with Cell, I think.
Yeah. That maybe that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that one was actually Mike.
So how would you share samples? Because any kid that picks up music now is going to download a VST and it's just going to have a series of blah blah blah. So how did you share individual samples, sound banks? How did that work between all of you?
That's a really good question. And without getting too specific, I will say this. It would not be done the same way today as we were doing it back then. There's been such
In the era
a
of
huge
VHS
shift
tapes
in technology since then.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the era of VHS tapes.
The mistake people make is that they assume it was VSTs or Son fonts or whatever, and it's go ahead, Mike.
I think we all had a same Elisa's keyboard or the QS6. I had a QS6, and I think, what did you have? Just a QS, Julius? That was
I had the 7 with the 76 keys.
I had one too. Bruce had one. We all had one. Yep.
What happened was I had this thing when I started to work for Bruce, and then I brought it into the studio, and so much of it was, I was using it a lot for earlier episodes, and so it just became one of the things that was kind of a standard. And there were a few other units like that. And another Wayback Machine thing here, kids, is that we didn't really have soft synths back in those days. We had these external units that we patched MIDI into. Did that sound too condescending? Because if it did, I didn't mean it that way.
We sort of did have soft synths, but it wasn't exactly the same. Like, there's a Roland sampler called the Roland S760, and you could load custom samples into it, create your own, or you could buy discs that would go into it. And so that was like the contact of the day. And so we
each had a Roland 760. Right?
No, we didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
You were the only one.
Oh, I thought everybody had one of those.
No, I had one too.
Oh, you did?
Okay.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
damn.
you
I
were
was the only one who didn't then.
Yeah,
We're actually sharing your samples, but Mike, it didn't sound condescending, but at the same time, I have to say it's not an obsolete thing, because as someone who 90% uses hardware today and 10% software for generating sounds, I still think that's still a very valid format. But also with soft synths, we didn't have actually VST was out. VST standard existed at that point. Cubase has already brought out VST 5.1, which is Cubase version, and that's when they premiered the whole VST thing. But we didn't use that at all. We used Digital Performer and Pro Tools, and those were not leading the DAW war at all with the invention of plugins. However, DigiDesign, which was the company that was Pro Tools' kind of parent before Avid took over, or before they became Avid, actually there was one soft synth sampler kind of thing that I was using. I don't know if you guys know about this, but it was called Sample Cell.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And that was DigiDesign's early attempt of creating a software that supported with its dedicated hardware cards. So it was basically a sampler that was housed as a card in your computer, where the card was doing nothing but processing fast sample playback and better samples. And I did use actually some things from that in the score. It wasn't bad at all.
Didn't that come out like while you were working on the show, though? I don't think Sample Cell existed when we started.
There was Sample Cell 1 that wasn't very popular before that, and then Sample Cell 2 came out, I suppose, around the same time, and that's when I had that. I had that second version, yeah.
Okay. Another thing that we did to be able to share these things across, as far as the recordings themselves, is that we used these blocky external hard drives that were SCSI drives, and
this is the actual music. This is our music library.
Pro Tools sessions and stuff. So
and I had my own personal keyboard, which is a K2500, and it could read Roland samples. And I think at one point we recorded some drum stuff over and I made a custom Kurzweil kit out of it. So that's how I was getting the 760 samples to work, because my keyboard could actually read. So even though I didn't have a 760, I was still capable of consuming that format.
I think what's even more interesting than how we shared samples is the fact that other than the Alesis QS and the 760 samples, we all used some less or more other gear that we didn't share because we only had one off.
Yep.
And that is actually brings a different sound that helps you to identify who's behind which track. Because if you hear or recognize some of those sounds, or if not even if it's a preset, but just the character of certain sounds, they came from the same person, and we all had something extra.
Oh, that's
It's
really
like a fingerprint.
You guys had a fingerprint.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
More than you would think.
Yeah, no, it's.
Yeah. Everyone knows about
I know exactly. When I hear it, oh, that's Scott or that's Julius or.
Yeah, I think the three of us are probably best at that than anybody. But like the composer group that's redoing the score in our old style, I remember that's one of the things they said about me particularly was like, oh, when we heard that, because they've studied the Kurzweil and they know it. One of them bought one. So he's like, whenever I hear that Kurzweil, I know that's Scott.
I think it's more, I guess, important is that other than the sonic fingerprint, there's definitely compositional fingerprints, and some are subconscious, and it's just, you bring your own style and things. But dare I say, some are actually conscious, and there are some things that are in the music that are low identifiers for all of us.
Totally.
That you could analyze and find and say, oh, so that's why it's in there.
That brings up a really good point, actually. So I've got a list, and I don't know how accurate it is, but like each song from the released American soundtracks is attributed to a composer, one of you guys. And yeah, each song is attributed to one of you three, but how much did you guys work together on specific songs?
Not at all.
Not at all, really. So it was just like,
But
for the most part, no.
with the caveat, because if you look at we put a list on Reddit, I was the main one behind that list. But there's a lot of collaborations listed on there. But it wasn't like we were sitting there going back and forth figuring out what to do together. It's more like I would layer stuff onto Mike's piece, or maybe somebody would do an arrangement. Like maybe I'd do an arrangement of one of Mike's tunes, or like Mike might do something inspired by something I did.
True.
But usually, yeah. So we might layer onto each other, or we might do stuff inspired by each other. But rarely were we, or never were
sitting
we working
down and saying, "Okay, what's going to happen here? What are we doing?" What's
even
the
though
group?
like back then you were all in the same physical location.
Yeah.
Yes, and as you might imagine from Scott's answer, which were all involving himself and Mike, I was the loner who really didn't collaborate.
Yeah, because there's time difference. Like
It was-
Julius and
yeah.
I couldn't collaborate because we didn't work together. We were barely there at the studio together.
Right, yeah.
And I will say also that there are certain tracks that we didn't work on together at all, but they've been butted up against each other in the edits on the CDs. So you'll have to put, okay, this song was Scott and Mike, but it's actually two different pieces, and the first part might have been by Scott, and the second part might have been by Mike,
that makes sense.
or vice versa.
I wanted to say also that one of the coolest things is that when we got back together, what was it, 5 or 6 years ago now, we finally did really get to start collaborating together, and it was totally a blast.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, and I did play guitar for some of Mike's tracks, so he did write out music for me.
Absolutely.
And I would go in and read the
My
sheet
direction
music
would be about as specific as what apparently we got on those notes. Play guitar here.
If it was power chords, Mike probably wrote the exact notes I played. I might have added fifths. He usually just wrote the bass line, and I would add the power chords. But then but when there was a case where it was a lead, like Heroic Trunks, I kind of played the melody that he'd written, and then I did some noodling in some places.
So you did have like very minimal like collaboration pieces.
That's probably the most directly we collaborated was when I played guitar for Mike's tracks. Yeah.
Okay. Because I've got like in my list the Trunks compilation says like it's too complicated. That's basically where it stops.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, to pinpoint to a specific composer.
That one was an edit job. Maybe Julius to speak to that, but there was editing done for those tracks, and so it could be like this track on the CD will be like 3 different pieces by who knows who edited together.
Why did that happen with Trunks? That saga in particular, and
I think it was Bruce's idea,
nowhere
but
else.
Julius maybe could speak to it.
I would even say it was Fan's idea when the CDs, the soundtrack releases started coming together, those were driven by fan requests. After the first couple of CDs, especially when some of the whole piece library tracks were put out, which, if I remember correctly, Bruce wanted to make them longer. Because, like you have to realize the film score track is as long as the cue is, which is as long as a fraction of a scene or maybe the full scene is, but it might be 30 seconds long. So he wanted to make them into full pieces. But then after about the first couple of CD releases, people started sending their requests, like, can we have, that piece released? And of course, what they would point at, and I know that was a big part of Bruce's job, to email back and forth with the fans and ask for specific episode numbers and how many minutes and seconds into the episode they're hearing the music. And that's how he would identify it. And I have to be honest, I never learned the library titles enough to know exactly which piece to pick up if someone describes a scene that I didn't do. I knew enough to score my parts, but when it came to these soundtrack releases, I couldn't just from the top of my head say, oh yeah, that scene, this is the version that we used. I didn't know. So when he got that, we actually grabbed the tape from the archives. We queued up that scene, listened to the Pro Tools full session version and looked at the files, what was used. And in many cases, it wasn't just simply a piece of the original, like an edit of the original, but it was already kind of rendered in place or processed, or, you couldn't really trace it back to where it exactly came from. It had a weird title. Sometimes the file would just, describe the scene, right? As opposed to the actual theme that it came from. And so you can imagine when fans are asking for a myriad of different scenes and they all have these 15-second, 20-second little parts. And yes, they belong to usually the same character. But when you grab these together and your task is, well, let's turn it into a 4-minute long piece so that's going to be a legit track on the CD, then there's only one thing you can do, which is try to make some musical sense out of them. And it might not make sense for the character or for the show that much. So.
I learned so much just now. That was great.
And that goes back a little bit to Ben Kasparic.
From everyone's. Your shows, Scott's shows, my shows, or scenes, Ben's, everyone's. When there's not that much time, you have a character that has been in the previous 50 episodes and has a new scene. You just have to come up with something new because you don't want to just recycle everything. Then you look for a mood, a change in the location, the situation, and whatever that you can add as a modifier. So instead of writing from scratch, which you would not have time to do for 20 plus minutes of music every week, necessarily, it depends on many things.
We did for episode 68.
That was a flex.
You would take the original scene, original theme, and you might overlay some tracks on top of it. And then you just quickly mix it down for that 20-second long scene that you needed right there. And that was good enough for the episode. Imagine like 3 tracks, you bounce it out. That's a new piece, basically a new version of the piece at that time. One of the tracks might be just one overlay. The other track might be another overlay. And the third track might be the full already composed theme from 25 episodes before. But what we did is not just bounce the episode as a soundtrack, but knowing that we might want to use this remix, if you want to call that, this new version later again, you might bounce that new variation out under a title that you can think of under 5 seconds.
Yeah.
That just type something in that has the name of the character and whatever.
Cell runs.
And then put that into the library. And then you remix the remix of the remix after a few.
So I used to do that
episodes.
occasionally. Yeah, I remember there were some elaborate edits that I had done or done in collaboration with Ben maybe, but I remember thinking, wow, that was a big job. And it came out okay. So in case we ever need something with this timing and these beats, I'm just going to bounce it out as a new track and call it X, Y, or Z, and it would be part of the library.
So imagine if you pull up a session that has a 4th iteration of an original, and it has a name, it has a title. Then what would you do if you edit a CD together? Well, you can open up the previous 4 sessions because a fan requested. So you put in half day of work into figuring that out. Well, it's just not an efficient way to make a compilation CD. That's just one of the many things that you're doing. So that's why often these edited versions ended up on the CDs, because you had to put something together for a 4-minute piece.
Yeah. So listen up, y'all. Those tracks on the CDs weren't meant for CDs. A lot of times they were just the recordings that we had put on a drive for us to edit from. And then it was like an afterthought, here's this track. What are we going to put on a CD? Just throw this file in there. And that's why we have tracks with weird names. Like one of the ones that I did was Episodic Trunks. And I never thought of that as one piece. It was just a bunch of different beds with that melody. And I never thought of it as a great composition. I was just like, okay, I want this version of it that sounds like this. And now I'm going to go into another version of it that sounds like this. I want to tell this story in full now, just for fun. There's a track called Heaven Sent Trucks. People get excited about that one, I guess, but it's actually just a tiny little clip from Episodic Trunks. And the deal was that the original Episodic Trunks had a big glitch in the middle of it. There was a pop sound in that file, and it was right in the part where he goes dun, 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 right with this, and it's a sound. It's called Heaven Sent with this CENT.
Yeah, on the
sound on this
QS6.
That's
right?
That's why it's called that. It's called that because of the patch that was played there. So I just wanted to bounce out a version that was fixed, that didn't have that glitch. And then it got sent to the CD as a separate track. But I was like, no, that was just a fix for the pop sound. And now it's like this famous piece
now it's iconic.
Like, oh, it's just a clip from another track on this. And they're both on a CD.
Someone reminded me a few years ago, and I got a kick out of it. I didn't even remember that there's a track called Pan's Flute. And I honestly haven't really listened to those CDs since they went out. But I went in and actually listened to it, and I tried to understand the joke. Well, it's a pan flute that was called a pan flute sound on the QS6 also, and that became the character Pan's Flute. But that's actually a pan flute. So I guess it
just lines up.
Sound names were inspirational.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good.
A lot of this music has become iconic after the fact. Did you have the sense that some of this was going to really resonate with people for years and years and years and years? Or are you always writing with that in mind, and you're trying to infuse it within what you're composing from the beginning? Or
We might have 3 different answers to that, but
Yeah, that's true. I would say that I was quite surprised, am still, at the longevity with which people have been interested. For me, at the time, it was a job.
I was definitely taken by surprise by how, I never expected, all the detail to which the fans treasure everything. Every tiny little edit that should be released as a separate CD track. Best of was never meant to be all of. I don't know. But yeah, I did have a sense that some of it might have some longevity. I don't think I ever expected it to have that. Like I remember when Goku was going Super Saiyan for the first time, I kind of coveted that, writing that scene, because I had a sense that was going to be big. And I did have a sense the Spirit Bomb was going to be a big thing. That was actually the first thing I got to write, so I was really excited about that.
You kind of dogged me about it, right? You're like, I want to do this.
Did I?
I think a little bit, yeah. Like getting, Bruce and saying, I've got a really good idea for this part.
I just remember showing up to work one day, and Bruce was like, okay, Scott, you're going to get the opportunity to write some music on this because Mike's doing some mix work or something on this other thing. So I thought it was more just luck. There was a certain configuration that we needed to be in, and and you were doing the mixes at the time, and so you were busy, and he needed somebody to score that scene.
However it happened, you did a very nice job.
Thank you.
I've just got to say that.
The Super Saiyan theme was the one that I really was jealous of, but you were nice enough to take me aside and ask for my opinions on what I thought should go in there, so that was cool. That was super nice of you to do that.
I mean, I have the same answer. I didn't think that this would become anything really huge later, but I think that's pretty normal. That's how you usually go into scoring a film or TV show. You're doing the job, and it's the film. And honestly, just to be completely straightforward about this, if the show had not been successful, no one would be listening to our music today. So, and that is true for every single film score that I've ever written. It's just a little piece that supports, that's what's called applied arts, because you're applying it towards something bigger, and the success of it depends not only on its own quality and how well it fits, but on the success of the big piece, which in this case is the film or the TV show. It's a wrong idea for anyone who ever wants to compose for a film to go into it and think, well, I'm going to do my best track because people will love this and I'm going to get all the calls and everyone is going to come after me to release it. It's just not how it works, and it shouldn't. It should support the film, whatever the film is doing, which is very different from when you're working on a piece because you want to release it, nothing to just music, nothing to with film.
Totally.
It's kind of crazy, honestly, because I love the score to Dragon Ball Z. I think that it adds so much to what is there and really helps make it like as long lasting as it has been. But at the same time, you're right. It has to have all of the pieces there to be successful. And music is the very last thing that gets added. It's kind of a burden to be a composer, to where like the animation, the sound effects, the voice acting, all of that has to be there and good for the score to even matter, for it to be memorable.
That's true. I don't know if I would say it's a burden. I would say it's an opportunity to figure out how you can add even more to that, or in some cases, it's an opportunity to save or at least improve the otherwise, miserable production or acting or whatever it might be.
Think John Williams and Star Wars, man. Just kidding. I didn't say that.
You're not wrong, though. Actually, I was going to ask a question about John Williams and Star Wars, because I know a lot of his first draft material, he would end up selling or licensing to other productions. Did any of you recycle material at all working on Dragon Ball Z from prior projects or prior things that you worked on that made it into the show?
Not intentionally. And hopefully not my mistake either.
The closest thing I could say to that was that eventually I used the music that I had as an audition for a scene, and very similar to what it was written for. It was in the Garlic Jr. series, so that I repurposed my own audition piece. It's only in like one scene, but it's almost the exact same thing it was in Dead Zone movie.
And in my case, same, like not intentionally. There is one that sometimes you write music and later on you realize that it's similar to something that you had written before, but it's definitely not intentional, but rather if you get into that same subsection of the moods that you were in when you were writing for another piece, then you might reach for some similar kind of forms of expression. And in my case, that was actually, funnily, the first track that I wrote for Dragon Ball Z, which was the Space Room. And that's like a little bit more kind of an ambient, well, it's quiet ambient-y piece. And then I much later realized that it's probably not by coincidence that the harmonies and the way the chords are changing is very similar to a piece that I had written about a half year before for an oceanarium. Basically a place where, you can see sharks and things, and I did an ambient.
Oh, I can totally hear that now.
Yeah, if you put the two next to each other, it's like, these are totally, very, very same. But it's funny because when you get into that mood, sometimes you don't even realize it, and you come up with very similar chords, and I have done this before. Wait, that was in Dragon Ball. I'm not doing this again. So,
yeah, I think composer Mick Gordon is who I picked this up from, but it was no composer has ever not plagiarized either themselves or someone else.
Very true.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess it's math based. Like you can break it down to there's only so many notes and so many chords and keys or whatever.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this topic lately, and it's kind of like you've got a very big forest that you can go and explore, but it's unlikely that you're not going to run across other people's paths when you do that.
Yeah, or sometimes it's accidental. You may not even know. Maybe I shouldn't mention it, but there's a track, and I'm on Julius' side completely on this. There's a track, I forget even which song it is. I think it's the Super Boo theme that people claim is similar to I forget the name of the band. I'm still embarrassed. But I think Julius hadn't even heard of that band before. And if you listen to it, there is some striking similarity. But like when I heard the fans saying that this track has a similarity to this other song, I was like, I see what they're talking about, but I seriously doubt Julius ever listened to that group ever. Like I can't picture him being into that. I think it was just a complete wacky coincidence.
I remember that he shared something with me. I don't remember the piece. I mean, much later, like few years ago. I remember that you mentioned that, but People have to also understand that when you're transcribing music and you just look at the notes and the chords and harmonies and things, the order of notes, like Mike said, you have, Western world, for the most part, you have 12 choices, more or less, and then you put them in different order. So calculate how many times you can start something, and after approximately 5 notes in a similar rhythm, people would identify the song. So just calculate how many combinations you have before you start repeating the same 5, and then you run it very fast.
That's where John was going with his question too,
yes, but that's just the notes, and a huge part of music is the arrangement, the instrumentation, the actual sounds, the performance, the articulation. So many things go into it that if everything lines up, then okay, that sounds fishy. I mean, accidentally. You guys remember that Evanescence had like their first huge hit? When I first heard that, and that was like early 2000s, it kind of hit me like in a negative way that, and you will laugh, but I wasn't, and I still don't laugh about that. Where did they hear my album called Mountain Flying that I released in 98, which has the exact same chords? And before that, I hadn't heard those chords anywhere else, not because they're so unique, but just one of those combinations that I hadn't heard before, and I released it, and it was a big part of my piece, and the big part of their piece before the last chorus, they used the exact same chords, but I was sane enough to not read anything too much into it. So after 10 minutes, I started thinking, okay, where they were active, where I was active, why would they copy that when they had an original album and it's only like, 6 chords or 7 chords after, one another. So it was just a coincidence, but it still makes you feel like someone was taken from you because you thought it was only your chords, but it just doesn't exist. Yeah. But there's so many other modifiers we can use to make it really your own, not just, the exact notes.
Yeah. So there was a piece that I had done for a video game. It was something I didn't spend hardly any time on, but I was running the sounds through distortion, like a guitar distortion pedal, just like beating the fuck out of the keyboard. And I had like this crazy like sound at the top that was running through. It was crazy. And so the guy who was making the video game was like, "What the fuck is this?"
Sure. Yeah.
I was like, okay. It was just a sound. I thought it was kind of cool. And so I wrote something else for the game. And then like Funimation wanted some like really industrial kind of heavy stuff, and I was like, well, I got this crazy ass thing I wrote that got rejected from a score, and so we were submitting all these different pieces to get a sound for like what I think maybe androids, I forget which. It's been so long now, I'm starting to forget stuff, and then they picked that crazy thing. They're like, this is what we want. And I was like, wow, awesome. What? It's so we started using a lot of. We didn't use that piece because it was crazy. Well, actually, there's 2 parts of that track that I got, and one was this dun 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 dun, and then the second part was when it goes crazy. But anyway, so I think that there's this devastation kind of theme that has these drums added to an older piece of Mike's that was written before I even started the studio. But the funny thing is, I had nothing to do with this track other than that I had written the thing that Funimation said, let's do something like that. Mm-hmm. And then Mike and Bruce, I think, took that, and then they added this like gong gong ka that was used like crazy in the Android saga. So I think even though I didn't have anything to do with the production or writing that, but maybe some of the seed of that idea came from this ridiculous rejected video game piece that I had done. And it did come from elsewhere. There's a track called Beers, Steers, and Queers by the Revolting Cock that has these big distortion drums, and also Trent Reznor, I think, did a lot of that kind of stuff. So that's where some of that came from originally. But anyway, so that's the closest thing I have to something that was from a previous project that was repurposed.
Well, I have super important questions next. So, Spencer, okay. Do you have anything else? And when I say super important, I mean I not important at all.
Yeah. Do you guys have a moment in the anime? Because it sounds like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but like you had no idea what it was going in. But just like any composer, any creative, really, the job that you were given, you kind of started to care about.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm curious what moments that you got to score that you cared the most about, and the ones that you were like, I actually really do want to know the notes that were written, like, hey, bring this mood musically to this scene, and you just flat out ignored because you didn't think it was relevant or, useful at all. I'm very curious because silence, does play a good part in storytelling and movies and anime, and Dragon Ball Z gets so few moments with actual silence.
So few.
And when it does, I think it sells it way more than this bombastic sort of like dialogue, music, sound effects heavy stuff. So thank you for providing those moments wherever they are.
Very few, but yeah.
I think of Frieza dying.
Vegeta dying.
Oh, Vegeta dying.
That was a place where I was like, I want. It was when Frieza killed Vegeta.
Okay.
And there was this moment where the wind goes by, and I was like, we can't put music here.
Yeah.
This needs a pause.
I remember you saying that.
But we did add a little drum hit from a sample library that has like boom. Or this bit very understated, very under the. I mean, it's just a moment of silence, but that was one place where I was like, no, we have to put some silence. We agree with all the complaints about how there should be more silence, by the way.
We could go on and on about that. But you were asking like a favorite moment, someplace you were really proud
absolutely.
of. And I got to say for me, and I've probably said this a million times, I think that Vegeta Super Saiyan
finally goes. Yeah. That's a good one. What's the first moment that like the Vegeta has the bells, like the big bell hits? You know what I'm talking about, John?
Hell's Bells is one of them, I think, is what they called it. They ended up calling it.
I think that was like the first time that I saw Vegeta.
It was just like, this guy needs bells.
Hold me to that.
And that may be like when you guys mentioned at the beginning of this interview, like you didn't come in until episode 68. I feel like Vegeta didn't get that theme. It's kind of ominous, and like he didn't get that sound until way later in the game. And I really do wonder if it's just because I didn't know when we were reviewing this that you didn't have a hand in it until that point, that it took so long to get there.
Yeah.
But once it hit, it was like, where has this been? Because it's the character's theme. Like it just is. Like it works really well.
Oh. Well, thank you.
One thing I wasn't most proud of was actually that Vegeta death scene, and I wasn't even writing music. I was just editing. But I got emotional with that. I remember layering some different tracks over each other to have the same harmony, and I was just like, this is beautiful.
What was your job? Like, you were a composer. Sorry, you were like a composer, but I've heard from each of you, I think, that like editing was a big part of it. How much of it was creating music and how much of it was editing a scene?
It varies
together?
person to person, but
okay.
Yeah, I started as 100% editing, and then I kind of had to prove myself as a composer. By the end, I had a period where I probably peaked as a composer, and then we got really busy with Cell, and I was just trying to get the shows out the door, so I would help with editing when I could, and I felt like something needed writing, and then I would jump in and do that.
See, for me, it was a very different experience because I had never really edited before. I mean, for audio production, other things, of course, but to create music or a new piece or just, musical content, the only thing I knew was how to compose. It was DBZ, under which I realized that editing is actually a way to compose. If you really think about it, this is one of my favorite topics, so I try to keep it short. But
no, please go on.
Composition is not about writing notes. It's about creating some content that you would think of music, but really the purpose is to resonate with someone, whether it's in film context for a scene or just because you want to connect and explain some ideas much better way than you can use a very limited thing like language. When you're doing that, it doesn't really matter how you get to that. So whether you're editing and then you end up creating a piece that generates these emotions or connects with people, or whether you're classically trained or not, to me, it's absolutely secondary, even beyond that. So in that sense, musical editing, and I'm not saying music editing, but musical editing, when there's musical intention behind editing, that's a form of composition. As a matter of fact, I teach film scoring at the University of Silicon Valley. And one of the projects I have for my students is to completely change the meaning of a scene by editing music, anything they can find, but it has to sound like it was written for a scene, but it has to express a completely different meaning. And then when they submit it and it starts working, then I say, okay, throughout the original, throughout the new one, come with another brand new meaning just by changing the music. And sometimes they do an excellent job where you feel like the music was absolutely written from the synchronization to the every aspect of it, and it's all edited. So is that composition when you change the meaning, not just different emotions, but you change the meaning of a scene just by changing the music? If you can do that by editing, that's composition.
Deep.
Interesting.
Yeah, Julius, how do I subscribe to your YouTube channel or TED Talk or
get me in the classroom?
Yeah, how do I show up to class through the window and just watch?
Subscribe to just me. Send an email.
Done. All right.
But you teach at a specific, like, you should plug your school, right? Like you have a...
I teach at University of Silicon Valley, but I would say if anyone who's listening is interested in these kind of topics or much more hands-on and more technical, production tips and tricks and whatever, I do talks, and lucky enough to be invited to some conferences and give talks and summits and whatnot. So befriend me on Facebook or follow on Instagram or whatever these things.
Yeah.
And then usually I put something out there and then just join.
Is it annoying to anybody or not annoying? I guess I don't mean to influence your answer of this question based off the word annoying, but how do you feel about being asked questions about something that happened 20 years ago that at the time you may or may not have even been emotionally involved in?
It's super flattering. It's fantastic. Yeah.
I'll be honest, to me, on a scale of 1 through 10, where 1 is extremely annoying and 10 is extremely flattering, just in general, like you said, fan reaching out and the second sentence getting into DBZ scenes in an email or a message, probably 3 for me.
Okay.
I had that sense. Fair. I'm going to be honest. I had that sense from you, but it's understandable. It was 20 years ago.
It's different to talk about something where we use Dragon Ball Z as a starting point and we talk about specifics like today we have been, but then it leads to some things that are like people can learn from or resonate with or just something interesting that's a bigger picture, like how we, for example, how much the director's notes matter, or does a composer have this much or that much flexibility, or how you can express certain things with editing. And to me, that's very enjoyable to discuss because the way people think about many of the music topics, just music industry, film industry, have been spoon-fed to them for the past 50 years. And some of the names, even John Williams that you mentioned, not knowingly have done a lot of that where there are expectations and everyone's there to fulfill it. And I'm so fed up and so hate that part of music, that everything is just a freaking cookie cutter. And then it goes into the industry where directors have the expectations because people have the expectations. So if there's a chance to change that expectation, when they can look for something new, something different, it's wishful thinking, but maybe one day the industry will have more freedom for composers to actually create more diverse work, because that's a rare occasion when it happens, when the score jumps at me when I'm watching a movie and I was like, this is new, this is cool, I have not heard that before. Very rare. And again, everyone has to understand it's not always the composer's fault, because often they don't have the flexibility, the playing field to go far left or far right. When a conversation leads to these topics, I very much enjoy it, and it's a good starting point because we all connect over that. But if it's only about what sample did you use from this instrument for that scene, who the hell cares? Like, just download the freaking sample.
I kind of agree with that.
Until you find it.
It was a sound, man. I don't know. I was fishing around and found a sound I like.
I love originality and hate repetition. So talking too much about anything that has happened. Why don't we talk about, I like questions if it's really Dragon Ball Z related, and I'm sure Scott is with me in this. If you get a question like, if you could go back, what would you do differently? Or if you were working on the latest, Dragon Ball Z, whatever is the latest thing, then what would you do? Or how would you do it differently? Or what do you think in 10 years, if there's a new Dragon Ball Z episode, what approach do you think could kind of explode musically that universe? These are the interesting things to talk about, how to go forward, not to get stuck 20 years ago. I mean,
absolutely.
Again, we appreciate the interest, but it's like people who live throughout the whole life, listen to nothing but the Beatles. Great. Respect it and move on and discover so much cool stuff that's out there.
We had a session with it was private, but we had a session with the composers who were kind of rescoring in our style. And that was one of the things that I brought up, and probably Julius did as well, which is that it's great that they're emulating what we did, but if you really want to be like us, we did have a commitment to a certain sound. We were trying to be like consistent somewhat, but we were also pushing the soundtrack to sound better, like in the ways that we thought it should sound better. And we weren't 100% like committed to always using the same sounds or whatever. For instance, I was a guitar player or am a guitar player, and I wanted to throw out the samples and use real guitar, and I thought we should use better orchestral samples. And so I was pushing for a broader, higher quality set of sounds and performances. And, Julius definitely had his agenda on how he wanted to change the sound and make things better. And Mike has his own way also. He was here from the start. Like, we all have our different goals, I think, which is one of the things so interesting about the three of us is, I have my theories about what each of our driving motivations are. But Mike has his own set of standards and goals that he's trying to achieve in the music as well. And it just makes it so interesting, but it's never to sound the same all the time. And to, if we, the three of us, were still writing for the show today, and if we had continued all these years, it definitely would not sound the same as it did back in
definitely not
2000.
And just to quickly pick up on that, I think there's something very interesting here that we haven't ever talked about, Scott, that another thing about the music that makes it resonate with people today and makes it interesting for them to listen to is, think about what happened in the past 10 years, past 12 years. The 80s were recycled, right? Synth pop and new wave became synth wave, and all that. All those production techniques and writing, everything got into the mainstream, right? And then once that ran its course, now we have been recycling the 90s. So basically, even though I have a lot of problem with the sound, with the mixes, with a lot of things about the score that we did, but one thing you can't take away from it has its character. Now, when you place that character in a different decade, that can be a really horrible character. It can be a really cool retro character, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's actually more exciting to listen to music from the early 2000s today than, let's say, in 2006, because the world has moved on in 2006, and that was kind of like, cheesy and cheap and outdated and rumplers and no cool samples and that kind of thing. But the things that sounded not so good then are now, when everything is sounding way too polished and way too manufactured, now that character is actually something to say, oh, that's actually weird and it's cool. So I think that actually contributes to why people like it today.
Yeah, that's another cool thing. I always had trouble identifying. I think all three of us probably had trouble identifying with the Japanese score, because to us, it sounded really old school. Like, when I hear the original Japanese score, to me, it sounds like 50s horror film soundtracks or whatever, or, some really cheesy old scores. But when I talk to fans of the Japanese score, that they tend to be younger people than us, and they may not be as familiar with that old sound, and to them it sounds fresh and different than what they've heard traditionally in film scores or cartoon soundtracks or whatever. And so to me, it's like genius, like I don't know, that's one kind of viewpoint I have on that music, and it's hard for me to look at it from the same perspective as the fans of the Japanese. I really like some of the stuff in the Japanese score, by the way. There's some great things in there, but some of it, I have, like, we used to honestly have, some bashing sessions. I'm like, oh my God, can you believe the old style stuff that they're doing? And because the composer, he was writing in the style that, he grew up in, and that's what people do. I'm very 80s sounding.
And 20 years before us, right?
Yeah. People nowadays listen to my music and they're like, wow, that sounds pretty 80s, Scott. Well, that's kind of when I grew
go
up.
Listen to some original Dragon Ball Z score. That sounds 80s, man.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that we haven't done the same exact thing to the Japanese score, but, maybe we have. There's been some awesome conversation here. And I hate that I'm just going to wrecking ball into it and talk about some stuff that you guys have already said that you don't like talking about. But just a couple questions, I promise. Did you guys have a Bible, like a theme? Because the Dragon Ball Z American score sounds a very specific way, like a very serious, grounded, like almost sci-fi, like you guys get into some like synth. Was there something that you guys went off of that was like cohesive, or did you guys just all do your own thing and it just happened to fit?
I think when I started doing the Dragon Ball Z stuff, I didn't have really a reference to go with except for what worked for me. And then I think that did probably have some influence on the way that Scott was then writing when he came along with it.
Oh, yeah.
And then Julius as well. I think that you were kind of pigeonholed by the what had been done up to that point.
How much did you listen to the Ocean score? Because I understood you guys were supposed to copy it a little bit, but like
my understanding was they didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought there was you were looking for a choir sound or something that they had used, and you wanted to use the same one. Or
I don't remember that. No, I remember them.
Really?
Basically, don't ever listen to it. And which is, I'm not trying to in any way diss the Ocean dub.
Oh no.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just the direction.
I will say this: Mark Menza, who did GT after us, was told specifically not to go and listen to what we had written. So that's
interesting. Okay.
Well, again, in film scoring, if you're sharing the job with others, you can just go your own way and do different things, because there's not going to be any consistency for the score, and the listener doesn't care, who wrote it. But if you get different feels and instrumentation, it's just going to be a hodgepodge of stuff, and it doesn't work. So we had to, and Mike is right that I was the third one joining, so a lot of things had been established before me, and I do think that I took things into a different direction slowly a little bit, but it's rather more of a modifier, a strong modifier than changing up things. I don't think that would be the right thing to do. To me, it was a very lucky situation that in 2000, when I joined, electronic music was nothing like it is today in the US especially. And so finding a show where there were electronics used, which I was coming from Europe, I was absolutely, that's my background, sound synthesis and film scoring. So I was very more comfortable with them in English, actually, much more comfortable. But then it's rare that in 2000, you would find something that's not using a simulated orchestral score, or mostly for TV show rock. It's just rock music.
Mm-hmm.
And although there are lots of rock elements in it, but for me, that was a much farther kind of world than the other two, the orchestral and the synth-based. So for me, it was actually not that hard to adapt. So thank you, Mike and Scott, for that.
always be there for you.
But then later, if you look at, if you listen to Boo, I definitely had to, again, go against my own taste. Well, I would never really listen to like heavy distorted guitar stuff, but at least not the way I wrote it. But then that's what the character needed. That's what the story needed. So you have to adapt as a film composer.
One thing was great about writing music for Dragon Ball Z was just the huge range of styles that you could do. I mean, I got to do like heavy metal and jazz and blues and electronic music and industrial stuff and classical sounding things. Like, it was crazy the number of styles. I even did like ragtime piano.
Mm-hmm. I feel like what you're saying is like any semblance of cohesion that people think that they hear across the episodes of the show is purely just because it's all in the same show. Like, you guys just had free range to do whatever.
Well, I mean, we had to keep a consistency, but at the same time, there were so many like wacky things happening in that show that,
that's
like
fair.
This crazy thing is happening. I better match it. Like, one of the scenes that I did where I used the ragtime piano, there was this scene where these cops show up and they're acting so goofy and it's so cheesy. And the comment said Keystone Cops. And I remember going to Bruce and, what is that? And because I was too young, I didn't know what the heck that was. And he was like, oh, it's some really old TV thing. Just write ragtime piano or cakewalk kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, I can do that. And so, or like when I got to emulate Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top, because there was a character that looked just like him. Like, why would you do that otherwise?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And like we've commented on the interesting voice acting that some of the American voiceover artists have done, especially for like the background characters and stuff, that just kind of put like a twist into another genre. So Dragon Ball Z does kind of like fall into slapstick comedy and things like that sometimes. So it's fun that to know that you guys were on the receiving end of all that and then had to make music that fit.
Yeah, had to
those
support
scenes.
that, and every
Yeah.
time supported it really, really, really seamlessly.
Yeah.
Thank you. But of course, there was this core sound that we would come back to, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And that's part of this the sound too. Like literally, like we used some of the same processors and like some of the same samples. But here's an interesting example. Do you guys remember that purple character? Is it Supreme Kai? Is it Supreme Kai? The short guy.
With the white
yeah.
hair, the mohawk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike and I. That was one of the time when we didn't communicate. We're totally both at fault, because usually when a new show started and there were new characters, we discussed who's going to write the theme for the character and who's going to do other stuff. That was one, I think maybe the only time when we didn't discuss that, or there was some misunderstanding, whatever, miscommunication. So we both wrote a theme for Supreme Kai. If you notice, both themes are used alternating throughout the shows for the character. But here's the fun part. We never synced or coordinated. He disappeared, wrote his own. I disappeared, I wrote my own. We're both surprised that there was another theme existing. But if you put the two compositions next to each other, they both reflect the mood and that character. So if you do something right, then even a completely different taste or different composer, you end up creating something that works, you know, for the
And you
same
get more
song.
variety too, because it was easy to like get too much of the same thing. That was a complaint.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god. I mean, the Vegeta theme's amazing, but I think some people complain that every time he talks, I'm playing the theme. That's what I was told to do, pretty much. But so it's cool when you have multiple themes, because then you can like get some variety and
And they themselves have some cohesion. So like it's not, you know, night and day. That's awesome.
yeah, we had a similar thing with Dr. Giro. Mike wrote a theme in a flashback sequence. I knew about his theme because I was editing in, but so I was a little bit bad because I was like, I want this sound, but I was lazy. I used his drum beat because Mike had done this fabulous, like Mike went to Lowe's or Home Depot or something and bought scrap stuff, and we recorded all these crazy sound effects in the studio, and he had made this drum beat out of these hardware samples and stuff that we had he recorded really, and it was the coolest thing. That's my vocal impersonation. But, so I took the beat from his theme, and then I added my own synth melody on top of it. We had two Dr. Giro themes, but they both shared the same kick-ass drum beat from Mike.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. Okay. I do have a couple questions written down I got to get to. The most memorable piece of music in Dragon Ball Z for me personally is the Super Saiyan 3 theme. Kick-ass guitar, like seriously over the top but amazing, fits the scene perfectly. Like, where did that come from? Can you guys speak to that at all?
That's a Julius piece, right?
Yes, this is Julius question.
Yeah, well, the guitar came from, I don't remember the sample, but I think what's more important is that it was going through a processor, a guitar effect processor that, and I mentioned earlier that we share the same sound. Well, that processor was actually one of the things that we shared. We had, I don't remember, like 2 or 3 units or maybe even 4 of the exact same Zoom guitar processor, not to be confused with Zoom recorder of today. And that actually had some really good guitar effects that even if you put a synth based or a sampler based sound into it, that's one of those very characteristic sounds that we all use. And again, when you say that it sounds cohesive, well, that's one of the several reasons. And so that's where the guitar came from. And the performance is actually me playing it, not on a guitar. I don't play the guitar. And at that point, we didn't have Scott to play the guitar. We tried to hire a guitar player who didn't show up.
I didn't know that.
Not surprising.
That's new to me.
And it had to be done. So, you know, what you can do is just do the processing thing there. And so that's how that came to be. There was a little bit of a going back and forth revision, not even revision, rather a feedback sort of process between Bruce and me on that. But otherwise, the idea there is, of course, how you can incorporate the theme of the show, the theme of the character, and create something new and take it to the next level and make it long enough where it not only works for that scene, but you know that's probably something that's going to be used later. And actually, the one thing I didn't think about at that point was that it's probably going to be needed for a CD, and I don't want to edit it together. So it's much easier to write something long, when you're actually writing it than when you just want to edit it. But yeah, that came together. And the only thing that was different about that than the other tracks, that we knew about it in advance, that it's coming a little bit more than just, you have one day to do it. Because often it was literally one day. Like you have a character theme, and then one day, and then you have to put it into the environment and do the editing and send it off, and it goes on Cartoon Network the next week. But there was a little bit of a lead time.
It paid off because it's awesome. While we're on that subject, I don't know who did the Gotenks stuff right after that. Like it comes really close. Was there did you guys sample each other? Like use a track that was already completed and kind of modify it a little bit to fit another character, another scene, another thing, because you only had like a certain amount of time, like you said, like a day for certain scenes?
We did recycle stuff, but I wasn't there for that particular. I was gone by that point, but I can say that earlier, I definitely, I would grab stuff just because I liked it, and I wanted to stay consistent, and I would grab Mike's stuff or do a new arrangements of whatever he had done.
It's interesting because you guys have said like you worked alone, but at the same time, you guys would pull stuff from each other and kind of remix it and make it fit. You guys might have had the same samples and things like that, but it also came from the fact that you guys were just using each other's music and kind of like putting your own personal spin on it.
I'm a huge John Williams fan, and like I believe in leitmotif and like keeping strong themes, and so I had a very strong desire to have thematic unity, and I didn't have ego about it. I was like, Mike wrote a great theme for this, and I'm gonna do my own version of it. I'm gonna keep thematic unity in here and give this show some cohesion.
Plus, if you think about it, when you have about 48 hours to write music for 20 minutes plus of a new show, because it's wall-to-wall music, as you know, so it's a lot of music per episode. It's not that easy of a task. I mean, just think about how much time it takes to properly write and produce a song. So you're basically doing 4 or 5 songs in 2 days. So let's say if you had come by the studio in, let's say, when was that? November 2000, then you would find the 3 of us working on 20 minutes of music. If you came by a year later, that would be 2 of us. And if you came by another year later, that would be only 1 of us. And I wasn't there in the beginning, but I was by myself for a long period at the end. And so the only way to keep it consistent and still create that much content is not by writing it, but again, by editing it. And what better way to do that than reach for things that had been done well. And when I just use it and modify it a little bit. And my favorite thing actually was taking 2 pieces that were neither mine and figuring out the transition between them. Because if you have 2 different pieces, even from the same person to 2 different people, it has to feel like it was written for this scene. How do you go between them, especially if they're in different keys? So that becomes a nice bit of a music theory challenge. How do you transition in 4 seconds, 21 frames, let's say, between an F sharp major and E flat minor? Too easy.
Too easy.
Difficult, but sometimes it's simple, sometimes it's a really tricky transition, and I actually enjoyed it.
It was fun. There's a piece called "Cell is Dead." It's just a short thing, but or "Cell is Dead?" ? And it was a dramatic moment where we thought maybe Cell was dead, and I was just like, I don't know what's to go here, but I know I need to transition from this key to this key. So that whole series of choral chords that I put in that dramatic moment, it's both a drama piece that I was trying to sound epic, and it's also a big calculus thing where I'm like, this. Okay, just in time, I'm in the right key for the next thing.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
I love doing that.
Scott, I have a question, if Spence, you don't mind.
Yeah.
After you left and you started working for Microsoft, right? At that time, did you keep watching the show?
Or were
I
you
did
too
a little
pissed?
bit, but not very much. Because there's a little bit of you just want to. It's too emotional. What's funny is my wife at the time did, and she followed the show a lot longer than I did. I've almost finished Dragon Ball Z. I had a recent push because I wanted to watch Dragon Ball Super, but I had to finish Z first, and so I made a recent push where I did watch a lot of the. I couldn't get through Kid Buu though. It was just too. I don't know.
That's our next thing.
Yeah, we're about to get there.
John's been worried about it since the beginning.
Yeah, so it's funny because we had a Halloween where we dressed as Majin Buus or Majins or whatever, and we put the little M on our foreheads, and that was my ex-wife's thing. And I was at that point, I was just trying to put it behind me for a while. You know, I didn't get back into Dragon Ball Z until around 2007 when I saw fans on YouTube posting videos of covers, you know, because you gotta understand there was a lot of hate towards the show from the people who loved the Ocean score or the Japanese score. So it was hard to be super proud of it on the internet or publicly because, you know, so you just kind of wanted to forget it for a while. I think the same thing is happening for the Star Wars prequels right now. There's a lot of fans who've grown up who were kids at the time, and the prequels are getting a lot more love. So it's similar for us, you know, back
Are you
like
saying
late
we're like
2000s.
the Star Wars prequel?
Well, I mean, in the sense that everybody hated them at first, and then the little kids who didn't have a voice started, you know.
But let me just
they grew
say,
up.
Scott was the only one aware that people were hating us. I didn't even know.
I was on IRC channels and watching the internet.
What saga or season did you leave?
Beginning of the Heavens Tournament. So I wrote the PyCon theme, and then I wrote the Grand Kai themes with the Billy Gibbons stuff.
Oh man! Okay.
And then so that was 1 week. I did all 3 of those, and then I was on to other things.
I was there until about the middle of the Boo saga?
Yeah, that was a long.
It was a long saga.
Like 1/3 or something is that we did together.
All
the
right.
first third, and then I finished the rest.
Man, so you finished it up like the entire show on your own, Julius.
Yeah.
Oh, big part of it.
When it was done, did you feel like an elation, or was it just like, okay, on to the next job?
Honestly, this is probably not the most popular answer, but try to be on the same show for a few years, and most of your musical life is centered around that, meaning you want to do other projects as a composer, but there's just not enough creative motivation left in you after writing for the same show for 8-10 hours, whatever hours a day. I was so relieved, so happy that it ended. There's always a little of a bittersweetness to it because you got into the routine, and then the chase tape is not coming next week. But at the same time, you're very excited about what's next, and you don't really want to write in the same style because this consistency is great, but it's also limiting. So yeah, I was totally ready to move on.
That's fair. And this question is kind of for all of you guys. Did you get to say goodbye to the show, like through the composition? Like, do you have a piece that was like all right, I'm done, this is the last thing?
No.
Not intentionally.
Not intentionally.
God.
But that last week for me was the PyCon and the 2 Grand Kai themes were my kind of like
which the PyCon thing is excellent. I think I remember talking with John about how we noticed that it stood out for sure.
Fantastic.
Thank you. So that was, I'm kind of proud that those 3 themes were all in 1 week, and that was my exit week. So that's kind of my boom, I'm out.
And even though I finished the last episode, but for me just like what I explained was relieving. At the same time, the show wasn't fully done for me because the soundtrack releases were just getting started.
Oh.
So I was doing that for another 2 years, which is a lot of editing.
Wow.
And, and some mixing and even mastering.
Good job on the mastering, by the way.
Stuff.
Yeah.
The first compilation, though, we did earlier than that, though, right?
I think 2 we did earlier, and then there was that Android. I don't know what to call it, really. I don't want to call it anything. Like a project or a band or whatever that Android thing came out to be. If anyone has listened to that release, it's just so disconnected from everything in the show. But then there was always a break, and then there were 4 or 5 more CDs. I forgot how many. I even did some graphic design for some of them. Believe it or not.
Nice.
Oh wow!
Which is not my field, but someone had to do it. So
Nice
the show was with me for longer than I I wanted to. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that for the first one, at least, the compilation, Scott and I worked really diligently together. That was one of the most fun times I had while I was working there, was us going back and reviewing, what are the best of to put on this thing. And then Scott and I actually put in samples of the voiceovers in between songs and stuff like that, but that all got taken out for legal reasons before it.
Oh, that's a shame. That sounds kind of awesome.
Oh, yeah, no, it was real cool.
I think in the end it was the right thing, though, because everything we did to modify anything was lamented by the fans. Like, they want the original soundtrack the way it is. If we had put a bunch of samples over it, they would have been like
random.
Can we have the version without the samples, please?
Yeah, there were a couple of those, I think, that we actually extended for the purposes of the CD.
That
was
a good move.
You think so?
Yes. Icarus's theme, Mike extended that specifically for the CD. And then, that's the main one. That was great. The extended Icarus theme is awesome.
I've got just one more thing that I got to ask, and this could just end up getting cut, but I feel like I have to ask it. We wouldn't be here tonight without our fans. They kind of turned us on to the fact that you guys are like cool and willing to, do interviews and things like this. So we appreciate you coming on.
No
Thank
problem,
you so
man.
much.
Well,
but
thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. One of the things that came up when this conversation was happening was one of our fans wants to use the episodic Trunks theme in their wedding. And they want to have like a piano and or guitar version created. John, of course, does all the music for a podcast and is an excellent composer. If we kind of made that up for them, you wouldn't sue us. Right?
We wouldn't. It's not our
we
deal.
wouldn't for sure.
But somebody else might.
Who would? What's their name?
Like, there's a battle between Bruce Faulkner and Funimation over the rights, and into this kind of stalemate thing. The way I always understood it is that Bruce sold the rights to Funimation, but then he sued them. I don't know. You can look it up on the web. There's still
definitely though. You can cover your own version.
Okay, cool.
Right.
Yeah. And if they're in their own legal battle thing, that kind of they're distracted, so they probably aren't going to look our way.
This is going to fly way under the radar, man.
Exactly.
Yeah. Did you have any other specific questions, John?
I mean, I have a bunch, but I don't want to take too much of y'all's time because this has already gone over the estimated, hour and a half thing.
How about one last finishing question?
What's
good to end with?
Okay. All right. Final question then. What, if anything, are you not proud of from the soundtrack? Do you have anything that you're like,
a fun one today.
I had 24 hours. I didn't care. I just threw this out there.
Multiples. Mine, I mean, some people like it, but it's the groovy disco tech. There's some serious problems with that. So the story behind that one is Pro Tools was crashing over and over and over again.
Oh, no.
I remember those crashes, man. He's not kidding.
I would get one edit done and I would save because I knew it was going to crash, and then it would crash. And then I had an onboard sequencer on my computer. So I would on my keyboard. So I would just tinker around with junk in between rebooting. And so there were 2 tracks done that way. Groovy Discotheque, which Mike named, by the way, that was, he got excited for some reason and called it that. But there's some really weird note choices at the end of that. And I like the beginning of it, but I don't know. And then there was another one called Power Music that I wrote the same way, which is okay. But that track, I don't know, the mix on it and everything. But it was never written for anything specific. It was just something to do while the system was rebooting.
Then how did it wind up on the show?
Yeah, Ben edited in because he liked it, and so he threw it in some places. After I was gone, that music shows up in a few places and shows that I wasn't even working there at the time. So
that was the closer.
The other guys are proud of everything they did.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I'll say generally, I think that I don't feel like I was ever phoning it in.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think I don't know if I would change things compositionally. What I would definitely change, I'm not happy about some of the sounds, samples, and the mix. So
totally.
For its time, it sounded okay. For its time and the pace in which we had to complete it, given the resources, it was okay.
Preach on.
But okay is not in my dictionary when I'm talking about my own music production. So I think compositionally, I think we did the best we could in our early 20s.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
There's some editing choices that I did. I definitely got better at over time, and then taught what I learned to the guys.
There's no question in my mind that my work improved over time as well. Experience for sure. If you don't know what you're doing and you start editing, you're going to get better pretty quickly. There's a lot of tricks.
I believe you.
You get a lot faster at it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Even with this podcast, like audio, we don't edit. Well, John does more than I do, but even just editing voices, over the course of a year or so, you get better.
Yeah.
And there's some like things that if you go back, you're just like, oh, that sucks.
Exactly.
But you're the only one that hears it. So, you guys, you hear this all the time, I'm sure, but thank you for adding what you did to Dragon Ball Z. Like the unique take on the music and the American soundtrack was so different from what the Japanese score was. And it really resonated with me when I was growing up and led directly to doing this podcast. So,
well, right on.
That's awesome, man.
Thank you guys so much. It's seriously, it sticks with me all the time. Is there anything that you guys want to what are you guys working on now? We've talked a lot about the 20 years ago stuff. Is there anything that you guys want to bring up?
I've been writing some tunes for my now fiance to sing that I'm excited about, but
sure.
But
Nice.
none of it's quite ready for prime time yet.
Fair enough.
I play in a band called Safety Meeting, and we're recording a new album right now.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Coming along very well.
I'm working on a lot of different things usually at the same time. I have a project called Forgotten Future. I've been doing it for a few years and have released a couple of albums, and it's a series of 4 albums. I'm working on the second one. It's sort of a concept work, so it's very slow. It takes time, lots of details, and I had to put the live shows kind of on the back burner now with the lockdown situations and live show situations, but we'll see when I get back into that. And on the side, there might be some fans who also are familiar with Berserk, which I did a theme for, Guts theme. And I'm getting ready to remaster, thinking, just tying in with what you asked, like what we didn't like or we would go back. At this point, have released 10 albums so far in my life, and I'm happy with some and not so happy with others, especially when it comes to the final sound. So I'm gonna do a remastering and re-release everything because I just want them to be, a better version of them out there. So always lots of things happening.
So I got 2 kind of angles. There's stuff I've done on my own. I've done 5 albums of stuff. Some of it's revisited the Dragon Ball Z sound. Just trying to prove who we are. So I did the exact opposite thing I was talking about earlier, and I went back to the exact sounds that we used before, and here's some new stuff and exactly that same sound that you remember from the old days. So I have a whole album called Z Music that's that kind of stuff, and then I've done more since then, but I've kind of added newer sounds to it, but still bringing in the old. And then professionally, I've been mostly doing work as a C++ audio engineer, programmer guy. I worked for Roland for a while doing programming for them and worked on Roland Cloud. And then recently, for the last 2 years, I've been working on a game called Sky, which is done by a game company literally called That Game Company. And if you know Journey, that was on the PS3, it was a launch title. Yeah. It's very kind of artistic. So this is the people behind that. They were the first video game to ever be nominated for a Grammy. Which is one of the reasons I took the job, because I was like, oh, hell yeah, some people who care about music. I don't write music for it. I'm the programmer guy. So they have a cool music system where you can play musical instruments in the game, and you can go on YouTube and listen and find like Sky, COTL, Children of the Light, and you can find clips of people playing Studio Ghibli themes, Final Fantasy, all sorts of anime songs, and they're all using this music system that we have in the game. And it's super fun to support, and we come up with new features for the music system or different ways for them to show off their talents. So that's been a really fun project, and that's what I'm continuing doing right now. And I haven't been writing so much. In fact, YouTube was like, I'm going to cancel your partnership if you don't put another video, guy. And I'm probably gonna get another one of those pretty soon. So yeah, not so much output lately. But if you haven't checked me out before, you can go see the Morgan Studios stuff that I've kind of put out in the past, and maybe it'll be more in the future. I don't know, but I'm pretty focused on Sky right now. So if you want to see what I'm up to this minute, check out Sky on mobile platform. It's on Switch. Yeah, there's another platform we're about to release on. I forgot to check if we've announced that or not, but it's free on mobile. Just download it.
That's awesome. All right.
And then also there's SSJ,
Yes.
which is the three of us. That we had a recent offer to return to Youmacon in Detroit.
Youmacon.
And Scott is planning to go to Hawaii instead of Detroit that weekend.
Yes, with my game company. Sorry.
How dare you?
Sorry about that.
But they promised us that we'll be back at Youmacon next year. And if any of your fans listening to this has any connections with, decent sized anime conventions, please suggest SSJ for your next anime convention. We'd love to come and entertain. And if you're not familiar, SSJ is the three of us playing through some of the good old tunes, maybe some new ones, some new numbers.
New arrangements of old ones too.
Yeah.
Dude, I love that.
Yeah, we'll see.
I hope to be at one of those conventions sometime.
Our fans surprise us. It might happen.
But yeah, thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
I know we went over the time. Thank you for staying
Seriously
on and not
appreciate
just
the hell out of
ghosting. Yeah, thank you all for listening. Until next time. Oh man, John, what an interview that was a week ago.
What an interview. We're just moments after the interview and definitely not like a week and a half later.
Yeah, that was a good time. It was way more professional than I expected it to be.
Yeah, it got cut, but I think I asked if they knew Jonathan Frakes, and the response was your laughter of embarrassment and absolute awkward silence.
It was so jarring. I had to cut it.
No,
like,
it's
it
fair.
didn't, because there was like 45 minutes of lead up of like serious professional interview, and then there's 45 minutes after of serious professional interview. That was your one time of trying to make it like more zany.
Yeah.
They did not take the bait. One of them, and I don't remember who it was, said they didn't even know who Jonathan Frakes was.
It was Scott. Yell at Scott. Scott said he didn't know who Jonathan Frakes was. Everybody can get on Scott after for that. But they don't actually get after Scott. All three of them are fantastic.
Very cool dudes.
Awesome dudes.
Very cool dudes. Had a great time with them. It was very different than the Eric Bale.
Yeah. So things will be normal next time, probably. Maybe. I don't know. We'll find out because it's the Saga in Review, and that's always weird every time. So, do you have an idea for what we're going to do? Because I'll tell you what I don't.
We talked about experimenting with like a video episode.
That's right.
And then like seeing if we can post that to Spotify, or if we just extract the audio and then put the full version on YouTube or something.
Yeah.
So maybe we can try that. But
anybody know how to add video to Spotify?
Because it might be beneficial, because then we could post stuff on like Instagram Reels and
it's true.
maybe even TikTok, like all the sweet things those kids are doing these days. Because I posted a Rick and Morty, Rick firing a Kamehameha to kill somebody in Fortnite as like this 10-second clip that I took when I was just trying to get Indiana Jones unlocked. And
oh, that was literally you?
Yeah, that was literally
me.
It was
okay, all right, cool.
It was my own footage because I have it set up my NVIDIA. I'm such a nerd. It records every time I eliminate somebody in Fortnite. It works that way in Call of Duty Warzone too. Some of them are shitty, and that was just one that I remembered being hilarious.
Oh, see, I was gonna
for the pure Fortnite insanity of it.
I was gonna make the dick joke and be like, so your hard drive is empty. But no, you're actually pretty good at these games. You're actually fairly okay.
A lot of them are really just like me not hitting my target for 29 seconds, then 1 second of me actually hitting.
That's all that matters, right?
The target, yeah, but it's not fun to show your friends. So the Rick and Morty, or the Rick on the Nimbus Cloud, that's actually me. And then I posted it on Instagram Reel like a month ago, and I still get notifications on my phone from people liking it. And I think like there's like one comment on there. But the point is, video content kind of slaps. And,
yeah.
Being an audio only format is a little limiting, I guess. So maybe we'll try something weird with video. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
See, the problem is that means I have to wear a shirt, which is the reason my webcam is off at this very moment.
You don't, though?
I don't, though. But I probably will. If we're posting this online to the universe, with the amount that I haven't been working out recently, yeah, I probably will.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's why I wear shirts all the time. Thanks for listening to the interview with the awesome Dragon Ball Z composers. We really enjoyed it, and in case you were curious about that last question where we talked about getting sued by the composers for covering their song, that was a request, sort of a request, kind of just something that one of our fans, MJ, mentioned on our Discord channel, discord.io/ArcadeDBZ, has been looking for a cover of the song Episodic Trunks done in a certain instrumentation style. We had this opportunity where we were talking to the composers anyway, and we have a composer
Hi,
on the podcast team.
that's me.
So we spent the week trading off editing duties and John doing his composing thing, and this is kind of what we came up with. I can let John talk about it more because I have been just editing. So
Yeah, you're hearing it right now. It's Episodic Trunks. I just sat down and wrote out a piano composition version of the song Episodic Trunks, and it sounds like dog shit right now because my piano samples are terrible. So it's probably actually sounds more in line with how it would have been on the show were it just a piano piece.
You know what you should do is you compare it to the QC6 keyboard.
Was. Find their original piano samples. The keyboard's probably better because the samples that I'm using right now are the basic contact samples. If anybody knows anything about, well, I mean, we just had a whole episode about music production. I can sit here and nerd out. They're the basic contact piano samples. They're really not phenomenal, but I sat down and I arranged the whole song for piano so that a pianist at a wedding could actually play it, or an organist or whatever. I'd love to hear this on an organ. That'd be amazing, actually.
That would be really, really
But
cool.
It is not just arranged in such a way that I can send them the sound file and they have to like learn it by ear. No, I actually put it to sheet music, which sucked. Let me tell you, that was a nightmare getting it to figure out, because Reaper makes it easy. With one click, I can convert it to a piano roll sheet music, but there's no like annotation in there at all. So I have to manually go through and like, okay, pianissimo here up to crescendo to forte. This needs to be louder. This needs to be this, that, whatever. So this is a labor of love, and I hope you love it.
So I'm guessing John's going to get in contact with MJ, send that sheet music.
It is as true to the first section of Episodic Trunks as I possibly could make it. The thing about that song is, after listening to what the composers were saying about how the CD was compiled, you can absolutely hear that, okay, this song, in quotes, isn't actually a song. It's just a series of cues that they've shoved together from the show. So knowing that, I took the outline of the main cue and then just kind of expanded upon that to make it more of a background wedding track. I tried anyway, so hopefully it works out. And if not, then email us, mail@DBZ.com. We also have a phone number that is 385-DARE-1-OX. If you enjoy our content, you can check out some of our other podcasts. We've got one called Tales of Nowhere. It's a tabletop RPG podcast, and I'm going to plug it because in the near future, I'm going to be on there for the first time since the last time, and it's going to be pretty rad. It's a totally different thing that we're doing. And if you haven't listened to that show, or let's say if you're not listening to that show because I'm not on it, which is a really strange concept, but I realize it's possible. Listen to this weird arc that we're doing. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a perfect entry point designed specifically for newcomers, and we're really excited for people to listen to it.
Yeah, it's going to be fucking awesome.
It's weird. It has this kind of energy.
It does.
Like, at least more so than a lot of the Tales of Nowhere content. I really like the direction that it's going.
Yeah.
I just kind of did the whole outro. Nice job, buddy.
Hey, well, you got us
That's good.
started, and then I just saw the segue opportunity. So I'm like, all right, let's just slide into that. We don't have to do a pun. We haven't had to do a pun in so long. I'm so
I know,
happy
it's
about that.
awesome. We've gotten off scot-free. And we probably next time, oh shit, I did a pun, didn't I?
Wait, what?
We got off
Scot-free?
scot-free.
Oh my God. What the? You didn't even mean to.
I know, it counts. It's close enough.
You are the king. You're like the Julius Caesar of puns.
But like the kind of king that does one royal act and then bounces so that nobody can see that they're actually not skilled at all. What'd you call him?
Julius?
Slash me?
Isn't it Julian? Or is it Julius?
No, it's Julius Caesar.
But the guy that we just interviewed.
It is. That's also Julius. Yes, you did it. You've also done it. Mike. Got them all.
Nailed him. Yes.
You think Mike would be the easiest one because it's literally what I'm talking into.
Right, yeah.
right
I was
now.
just thinking that exact same thing. But you know what? I think we should just leave Mike at Mike.
Yeah.
That's good.
We'll call it a mic drop.
That was as good as it's going to get. Oh,
That's
good.
Could not be better.
Oh.
Bye.
Bye.